Stillborn to Life, a novella by Valerie Lynn Stevens. Chapter 2. My mother, Caspia, had spent most of the years up to my birth in the streets of New Orleans, an orphan child of the New Gypsies. The New Gypsies were a band of persons, ever nomadic, bound by their ancestry to be a volatile, insatiable breed. Perverse longings of every imaginable variance kept them always on the quest, their tainted name keeping them ever alienated and on the lam from their savage deeds, as they were, perhaps justifiably, bound by their socially dissenting creeds. They made their living in some ways honorable, but in most abominable and inhumane. To most they were parasites and monsters considered lower than even whores, murderers, or cannibals. Their long lineage provided them always with a refuge, but also an unending threat. They were both freed and encumbered by their blood ties. The New Gypsies were a familial cult, even to those not of their kin, for they were always coveting that newest member to flesh out their clan. As a result of the constant social endangerment of their particular kind, the New Gypsies went by the adage that there was danger in numbers and safety in nothing. It was this inbred paranoia and distortion of perception which kept them both more vulnerable and yet more intrepid than any other human group of whatever current milieu reigned and subreigned. Many lost souls would follow their scent like sharks out of water, hoping to revive their sense of existential fulfillment within the promise seemingly offered in acceptance and immersion into this tight, iron-fisted band of brothers and sisters. Some of the New Gypsies were so adaptable to any social environment that they could take on roles contradictory to their class, with a savoir-faire and an aplomb which even those of the so-called well-bred classes could not rival. These of the New Gypsies came to be referred to as the doppelgangers, for they could play the role of anyone else from whatever social caste they chose with more congruency than any seasoned thespian. These of the New Gypsies made imitation a form of insult, indeed, for they could play anyone better than they could play themselves. There were also many old legends and myths passed down from ancestral generation to generation about the doppelgangers also possessing the ability to shapeshift into whatever physical form they needed or wished. And indeed, the wisdom of their ancestors was greatly revered, and their presence was sensed even in the tiniest spider crawling along the cracks of a worn floorboard. The New Gypsies, like any other social order or caste system, had assigned ranks amongst them. The doppelgangers, or the imitators, were the second most honored and revered of their society, and were of both male and female kind. But by far the most valued and exalted of them all were the Theomania. These of the New Gypsies were said to be the only ones capable of being touched by the divine madness of the sacred frenzy. They were, in a word, the shamans and priests of their clan. They were possessed of prophetia and status raptus, and their gifts were in id quod est contra naturam, of that which goes against nature. The Theomania were also ranked as such, for they were by far the most fecund in intellectual procreativity, as well as possessive of a depth and breadth of mnemonic absorption and comprehension. The Theomania also possessed an innate and keen social clairvoyance as well, which definitely served them quite well. But, however blessed they may have been, the Manichaean laws of universal dialectics would also exact for them a curse, of equal and opposite force and effect. The Theomania were indeed the most gifted of their clan, yet were also the most acutely sentient, and hence were they susceptible to the darkness which was in the world, in themselves, and within others. They were most attuned as well to a strange mania, or old ancestral ignominy, and so would they be deemed by their Grecian forebears, the definition of deinos itself, altogether dreadful and terrible, yet also powerful, efficient, and exceptional, when their energies were properly sublimated. The Theomania had worked as architects, painters, sculptors, poets, thespians, dancers, and even as great orators and wordsmiths throughout their time. They were the new gypsies' hard line to the divine and the transcendental. And not unlike any other human social entity, the new gypsies were not without their own strict moral code and mores. But they would still be hated, feared, and exiled for their great hunger, their need, their desperation, their connection to the main vein of all beauty, truth, creation, passion, desire, and destruction. And so it was into this world that I, the silent gifted child, was born. My mother, though not a new gypsy by blood inheritance, was by fate. Born in 1892 to upper crust New England society, her parents were both old and new money, the deadliest and most cursed sort. It has been told to me that my mother was expected to be the belle of the ball wherever they went. The streets of her childhood were lined in red cobblestone, which caught the light of her tear-stained eyes upon those foggy, damp New England evenings, as she cried out for a life purged of all constraint, virtue, or societal prudence. Her parents always suspected that my mother was alieni generis, as she would twirl and whirl in rapturous and defiant delight in a world apart, whenever any restraints were forced upon her. And when she cried, it was as if all of the angels in purgatory had been released unto the fiery tomb of Hades. Her voice and demeanor were always precociously eccentric for a girl of her tender age and social class. My mother often felt completely estranged, ostracized, and alienated in her youth. She felt no real bond with her blood relatives. Their blood, but not like water, she would often repeat like a soothing mantra to herself as she wandered the New England streets in search of her true kin. This somehow consoled her and got her through. Yet when my mother was 8 years old, at a family soiree, her parents were the victims of a cyanide poisoning. No doubt, as my mother and everyone else surmised at that time, a politically motivated assassination. For those with money and prestige held a lot of power in those circles, and thus were perceived as a threat to certain others' agendas. Thus, Mother was left even more disconcerted and in even more disarray than before. Cousins of the family took Mother into their guardianship until she became of age, yet my mother already had a plan. And shortly thereafter, she ran off to claim her new and true life, a way of life, however, that was to become an agent of her slow but sure demise.